So I have two talks today. I'm going to start with CVSS by the numbers, talking about some of the differences in the math between version 3 and version 4. And then the second part, talk about some updates from the CVSS SIG, what we've been working on in the SIG. I had this a little bit out of order, so I want to show this. And if you don't know who I am, and you should not know who I am, but I'm Nick Leali. I am one of the CVSS SIG co-chairs. I'm also a member of the Cisco PSIRT. I'm an incident manager on the PSIRT team. I've been a co-chair of the CVSS SIG for a couple of years now, since November 2023. Been in the CVSS ecosystem and doing scoring for CVSS for a long, long time. Who remembers version 2? Yeah, doing that. And please do not judge me too harshly. There is going to be some code as part of this, a tool that you are more than welcome to use. I am a terrible developer, but I wanted to kind of make this tool to answer a question. And so that question really is, what's different about CVSS version 4? So I'm going to go over what makes CVSS version 4 different. Look at some of the data, what we can learn from that, differences between version 3 and version 4 data, and some of the resources that I've talked about. So really, CVSS version 4 is something new. It's not just 0.9 greater than version 3.1. It's brand new. And this talk is really about how you can adopt if you're looking to use version 4 in your environment as part of either your vulnerability management system or part of your incident response handling system, or if you're a PSIRT and you're providing guidance to customers about your own advisories, what you can do and how you can prepare to use version 4 in your own environment. So CVSS version 4 is not just a drop-in replacement for version 3. It's different. It really is different. The math and some of the assumptions in CVSS version 4 are different. There are going to be changes in the math that change how decisions are made. We all know what some of these bins are and how we call something low, medium, high, critical. We make decisions based on those things. And in version 4, those are going to be different. They're going to be different from version 3. So once you know once of those things, how they differ, you can make a determination about how you can handle the changes from version 4 in your own environment. So I needed to format this. It's not formatted correctly. Why care about the numbers? Well, really, because customers ask us about it all the time and it gets annoying. So, because of those changing demands in version 4, we should care about it. But really, it influences our decisions. And if something in version 3 is a high and in version 4 it's a medium, we need to understand why that is. And that happens, trust me. And so you need to understand what that is. There's also regulation, there's SLAs, there's a CRA, there's all of your internal SLAs, contractual obligations, compliance obligations. The math is important, even though we've talked about getting rid of the math entirely. And there have been lots of suggestions to that, kind of truth is getting rid of the math, but the numbers matter. And so we need to understand what's changing. So I started looking at some of these public sources of data to understand what changes in the data sets between version 3 and version 4. So I started with a question, and to someone in this room who really started this talk is, how was it going to change Cisco's own product security incident response process if we move from CVSS version 3.1 to version 4.0? How's that going to change how we write advisories, what we tell our customers about the impacts of vulnerabilities in our products in their environments? So that's really where I started. But I got curious because there are lots of organizations that are providing version 4 scores now, including GitHub, which is by and large the biggest producer of version 4 metrics so far, as well as data in the CVE JSON. So I looked at all of those data sources, and I'm going to look at those in more detail as we go through it. So how am I comparing these scores? So the script will check whatever data source you're interested in. It can be a local file, it can be JSON, things in a directory. I'm looking at doing some statistical comparison between those things using Python and NumPy, creating graphs of those things, and then really I'm looking at more of those data sources. But this is generally how the script that's available. Grab it, and please don't judge my code too harshly. um, again, I'm an amateur, but if you want to use this for your own environment, I encourage you to do so. This method or someone else is kind of just to start the conversation about how the scores that you're generating will change in your own environment, and you can look at that for yourselves. So some of the terminology that I'm going to talk about briefly when I'm doing some of these statistical comparisons, I'm really looking at a raw count of records, how many records appear in the database or in the data set, and that is for each record, this is typically a CVE, that has a CVE or CVSS version 3 score and a version 4 score so that I can compare them. I'm also looking at the average change. So that is, on average across the whole data set, what changed the numeric score from version 3 to version 4. And then the mode, the most common change. There can be some sort of strange results. And then the last piece is the qualitative boundary shift. So we look at, this is our categorization. There are, in Cisco, there are lots of other organizations who have their own qualitative boundaries. This is fairly common in the industry. You can set it to something different if you like, but this seems to be pretty standard, right? So looking at how qualitative boundaries changed from version 3 to version 4, whether it's skipping around or staying the same. So this is the start, the sort of genesis of it. And in our data set, these are the Cisco studied, the Cisco public CVEs that I started to take a look at. So internally, we are scoring for version 4. We don't yet expose those, but these are all of our public CVEs that have both version 3 and version 4 scores. The 308 records, on average, our score increases by 0.36. So across the whole range, now this histogram, and this is generated by the tool. You can try it on your own data. This shows the changes from version 3 to version 4. You can sort of see on the right-hand side, most of the scores went up. Right in the middle, that 111, those are the 0 scores. So those scores did not change at all. But some went up by 0.5, by 1, by 0.1, 1.5, by 2. So on average, they increased by 0.36. The most common change is that 111. On average, the most common change was 0, although there were many more to the right. The range, the biggest increase is 2.6. So one score increased by 2.6, and then one score decreased. But really what we care about the most is that qualitative boundary shift. On average, or not on average, but over the entire range, 15% of scores changed qualitative boundaries from low to high, low to medium, something like that. So let's look at those in more detail. This graph, also generated by the tool, shows the graph of the version 3 scores and the version 4 score. So if you sort of, unshift your eyes a little bit and look through it, it makes a cool picture of a sailboat or something. But the qualitative boundary shifts are listed here. So we have 15% of those, 49 out of 308. On 42 increased, low to medium 5, medium to high 36, and then some decreased. I think one of the interesting things, and we can look at these in bigger data sets later, is that There are a few that change from critical to medium. That's a weird result, and that's something that you all need, and we need to be aware of when we're doing evaluations of vulnerabilities. What changed in that vulnerability between version 3 and version 4? The nature of the vulnerability didn't change, but the assessment is radically different. So why all of a sudden in version 3 is it a critical and in version 4 it's a medium? I don't know, but you should be aware of that and you should plan for that in your own environment. So that's the Cisco data. That's a very small set of data, and Cisco does a certain set of vulnerabilities, right? Our products tend to be network-based devices and other things, not as many endpoints. So we have certain classifications of vulnerabilities that are more common. So let's look at a bigger set of data. So the CVE program data, 3,500 records as of March 14th is when I pulled the data the last time to put this all together. March 14th, they had 3,516 records that had both version 3 and version 4 vectors. On average, quite a bit of a different change. On average, just 0.19 of change. Their average, the mode change, actually, the most common change was a decrease of 0.1. I don't know, or 1.0 rather. I don't know why. I want to dive into it a little bit more. But they had a big shift. Some scores decreased, but on average, they increased. Their qualitative boundary shifts are radically different. On average, a third. 1,111 CVEs changed qualitative boundaries. That's a big difference. The range is also pretty big, although there's some weird outliers. So let's look at those qualitative boundary shifts. You can see that big, there's a lot of scores that are somewhere in the 5.4 range. I think they're cross-site scripting. But you can see scores move around a lot. So if you're doing vulnerability assessment and if you're a PSIRT and you're publishing advisories and you do something different for a medium or a critical or a low or a high, you're going to have, in the CVE's data, 491 new medium advisories that you wouldn't otherwise have written an advisory for. If you're a incident response team or a vulnerability management team, all of a sudden there are 491 new CVEs that you have to go track down that wouldn't otherwise have been part of your compliance for PCI DSS. So there's a lot of shifting here. And the other side is true. 359 CVEs go from medium or go from high to medium. Why are they suddenly less important? They probably aren't, but they're evaluated different. Oh, this is a big shift, especially if your vulnerability scanner, if your vulnerability management program is making decisions based on version 3 data, it's going to be very different in version 4. GitHub is an even bigger source of data than the CVE program. I've split this into two groups. So there's GitHub advisories that are reviewed and GitHub advisories that are unreviewed. And thank you to folks from GitHub who answered my question yesterday. I did not know what the difference was, but reviewed advisories are those that have had human review that will trigger reports through Dependabot and are making decisions based on this. So we'll look at the reviewed and then we'll look at the unreviewed, which is a kind of a wild west of vulnerability data, which is pretty wild, but also really interesting to look at. So looking at the reviewed advisories, we have 2,720 records, a bigger average change on average, increasing by 0.34. A lot of scores increased by a big chunk, that mode of 1.2, a big jump there. And they have a smaller ratio, but also still a big amount of qualitative boundary shifts at 23%. There's a weird range here. I'm not entirely certain. I think some of these may just be wrong because an increase of 8.7 looks like it just had a 0 score for version 3 and then an 8.7 for version 4. And I think it's the other way around for the decrease. So that range is a little bit deceptive. But here's what some of those qualitative boundary shifts look like. Big increase from the low to medium, and then interestingly different from the CVE program where it was more low to medium. There are more in GitHub that are medium to high, so quite a bit more that are increasing. And then there are some decreases. Those are going from, again, high to medium, sort of changing. But I mean, we're talking about a lot of net new advisory type of things or compliance types of decisions that are being made that are more highs and criticals essentially in version 4 than version 3.1. Something really to be aware of. Now, this is the unreviewed data. There are hundreds of thousands of advisories, but there are 3,400 records as of the middle of March. Again, a smaller average change, a lot of boundary shifts. 33% of all of the records in the unreviewed set changed boundaries. And about a wash here because quite a few increases, quite a few decreases, but things are shifting all over the place. There were many more big shifts in the unreviewed advisory data, looking at 45, and again, more critical to medium. I really am curious to look a little bit more about why those things have decreased so much, but there were even some big increases that went from medium to critical or low to high. Again, not sure why, but to be forewarned is forearmed, and you can have a way to look at this data in your own environment. So some of the summarizations, overall across the whole range, the scores don't change that much from version 3.1 to version 4.0. On average, Cisco scores increased by 0.3, the CVE program by 0.4. So it's about a 0.3 across the whole range. There are some individually big shifts. And these are the ratios of the entire set of data. So green are the things that did not change. These are, again, the qualitative boundaries. So green are the things that did not change. Blue are the increased qualitative boundary. So any increase from low to medium or medium to high. And the orange are the decreases. So those are decreased from critical to low or something like that. That ratio may be different depending on what kind of a vendor you are, what kind of products you have, what products and services and things exist in your environment. So you need to determine for yourselves what the impacts of moving to version 4 would have on your own environment. It varies on CWE, it varies on a lot of things, but really, again, CVSS version 4 is different, and to understand what the impacts to your own environment is, you should have an understanding of that. This again just showing that those boundary changes, especially if you're a PSIRT and you're trying to make decisions based on, am I going to write an advisory for this thing or not? Am I going to tell my customers, is this severe? Is it critical? Is it low? There are going to be changes. If you are a vendor like Cisco, there are going to be a small amount, but a handful of new high-end critical advisories you're going to have to write. There will be a few tiny blue bar, a few new mediums, but on average, not a whole lot more. If you are looking at data in the CVE program, you're going to have a lot of new medium advisories, a lot of new vulnerabilities in your environment to track down that suddenly were not vulnerabilities or not above that 4.0 threshold in PCI DSS or whatever other regulatory framework you care about. Now there will be many more in your environment. But the nice thing is there are fewer high-end criticals if you're only looking at CVE data. And GitHub kind of mirrors that. The GitHub unreviewed data mirrors that. But in the reviewed data, there are far more high-end criticals and just a few new mediums. So again, if we sort of look at this from a high-level perspective, CVSS version 4 is different. These scores the scores increase. They increase not uniformly. Over the whole range, they do increase, you know, in general, but there are some big shifts depending on classes of vulnerabilities. And this change can be very disruptive depending on your organization, the type of work that you're doing, the decisions that you're using to base on with CVSS. They may change, you know, quite a bit. And those score changes are very dependent on the types of vulnerabilities in your environment. So what can you do about it? If you're a consumer, this is something that we're talking about in the CVSS SIG a lot. You need to be very careful about basing your decisions only on the CVSS base score. All of what I've talked about is only the CVSS base score in version 3 and version 4. I know it's difficult. We've had conversations about it, but because of the lack of context that exists in just the CVSS base score, it can be difficult to make risk-based decisions solely on that. So look at using the full vector string, using base threat environmental to make better decisions in your own environment. But don't just rely on CVSS. There are lots of other systems that can help to make decisions. Making decisions, especially risk-based decisions on CVSS base scores, leaves a lot to be desired. There's also private systems such as Kenna, other vendors that have their own ratings that help you decide in your own environment. If you're on the producer side, we should be careful of making promises based on CVSS. We've had lots of conversations about these scores being divorced from the reality in which their products are being deployed, mitigations, things like that. We can probably do better at describing how these systems really impact customer environments, and we can, hopefully as vendors, we can try to provide more context about what these mean so our customers can make better decisions. It's difficult for vendors to provide full base threat environmental scores. We can at least help our consumers, our customers, to understand how to do those things for themselves, give them as much information as they can. Qualitative ratings that we have are still very important. We need to start, continue to rely on those. Our vendors, we all have those things, right? We all have our own qualitative ratings. We should feel free to deviate from those policies when we say this is a 9.8, but really it's more like a medium if we're looking at it from a risk perspective. So document that as part of your policy. Set criteria for how you set qualitative ratings, but be prepared to document that and describe it when those things deviate from those ranges that are typical. And then really the solution is using more of the vector string from both the consumer and the producer side, being able to understand where those products sit in environments and be able to help our customers to make better risk-based decisions. So back to the end, the tool is out there. I encourage you, if you're interested in v4 adoption, you want to look at how the vector strings you produce and use in your own environment are impacting those things. It's on GitHub. The whole presentation's on GitHub. Feel free to go try it. If you try it, you have questions, if you're interested in some of the results, happy to chat about it. Let me know. If you want to go look at more CVSS SIG resources, first.org/CVSS. Come talk to me first at cvss.org. Questions about the standard, questions about this. Happy to talk about it. So Questions in the room, questions on Discord. I'm going to get a sip of water.
Just to expand on Nick's last point, it's been a mantra within the SIG for years. CVSS does not equal risk. You got to look at your environmental factors, your controls you got in place, the place those systems have in both the infrastructure or if you're talking products within the products. You know, we used to have a list of about 100 checks we would go through on a CVSS SIG, and this was back in V2 days, but back then we needed to do it more.
Bruce is exactly right. Yeah. And this is some of the guidance that we're trying to provide. And so, you know, to caveat all this is like, we get a lot of questions in the SIG about CVSS base score, but what we, you know, we say to, again, not make risk-based decisions on CVSS base score. We're trying to move the ball down the field in that way a little bit. Yes. Yeah. Don't stat rank CVSS in your environment. The question was, do I understand the scoring inflation? No, I don't. I mean, part of the goal of the math under CVSS version 4 is to give more space for threat and environmental. And so really, I think that is reflecting the increase in score, because what we wanted to do is shift base up, and that leaves room more lower in the range for those marked up scores that have, you know, filled out threat and environmental, because typically those will be moved down, right? So I think it's by design, right? So if you're talking about a worst case scenario where a base score doesn't change and it's been attacked and your confidentiality, integrity, and availability requirements are still very high, and so you do all the threat and environmental markup and the score stays the same, it should stay very high, right? Because there's a serious impact and it's being exploited, and that system really is important. So that's why some of those numbers are, you know, continue to be high. Yeah.
Hey, Nick. Good morning. I'm actually just interested in sort of a show of hands from the people in the room. How many people have adopted 4.0 or using it as part of their production operation?
So there were only a very few hands.
Any comments from any of you that raised your hands on challenges?
Brian, you're preempting my next talk. Thank you for that. I will slip you the $5 I owe you for that later. No, and we are trying to understand what some of those pain points for adoption are. And literally, I have slides on that for that. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing that we have, just to respond to his question, is some of the things we did was converting old 3.1 to 4.0 and are going forward. But otherwise, no, we've had no major concerns on using 4.0. It's been seamless.
And for all my criticism about the numbers, I really do like the new standard. I think it adds a lot of context and adds some nice features. So, you know, I think it's worth, and I have a slide for the next part about, is adoption worth it? And I'll show you that shortly. Okay, well, I'm going to hang out. I'm going to switch to, you know, talking about a little bit of updates from the CVSS SIG, what we've been working on. And you know, talk about v4 adoption and some of the challenges that we are looking you know, to solve, some of the things that we're working on to help that. I'm just going to roll into the next part of it. So I'm going to talk about what we've been doing in the last year since we were here last year at VolnCon, what we've been, you know, or really some of the data, some of what CVSS 4, how CVSS 4 has developed in the last year, what the SIG has worked on. And we're running a survey, and I want to talk about some of the survey, what some of those challenges to CVSS adoption, CVSS version 4 adoption have been, how people like it, how people don't like it. There are a lot of opinions, and I think that's great. And then what the SIG is looking forward and doing here in the near future. If you heard Rob Arnold talk this morning about his UC2 risk ruler for CVSS version 4, talking about trying to have a new CVSS guide. We're calling it an enhanced user guide, but it's really like an implementation guide. It's about how vulnerability managers can use CVSS in their environment, enrich their programs, mature their programs to use CVSS at a higher level, and to get CVSS to that place to start making better risk-based decisions. I already showed this. So, this is some of the members of the CVSS SIG who've been, very active, participate. There's a lot of people who are very passionate about CVSS, who help every week trying to develop the standard, trying to update our documentation, who want to try to answer questions. And it's really a group effort. There are a lot of passionate people who care about CVSS, who are trying to make it better. And all of the people who are using CVSS, who reach out to us to ask questions, to provide feedback, thank you. So thank you to everyone. It really is a group effort. It's a great group of people who argue all the time like a family and have heated arguments, but are all trying to work together to move this standard forward. So thank you. Thank you to all of the SIG members. So in the past year, again, CVSS was released 2023. In the past year, we've had thousands and thousands, like I talked before about some of the data that I use as part of my talk, thousands of produced CVSS version 4 vectors. We have the CVE program and NVD supporting version 4 in their schema. The CVE program themselves have almost 5,000 v4 vectors. I pulled this data a couple of weeks ago. It's probably over 5,000 CVSS version 4 vectors at this point. GitHub has going on 10,000. Again, they're a big early adopter. They've had very good things to say about CVSS version 4. It works very well for their use, and they've really adopted it and provide so many scores. In the CVE program, we see 56 unique vendors who have provided CVSS version 4 scores in the CVE program database. The biggest by far is VolDB, followed by Juniper, Intel, Siemens, and several certs, including CISA and ICS cert, all who provide version 4 metrics. And again, the biggest by far is GitHub with over 7,000 and now probably 8,000 CVSS vectors. And I talked about some of those numbers earlier. So in the last year, we've continued to work on all of our documentation updates. We've worked on our examples document. I'm personally passionate about that, and this is a call to everyone in the room or seeing this. If you have examples, that you think are interesting that you would like to see, if there are some that are wrong, I will fully admit that they are wrong. Nobody's perfect, but if you have suggestions, feedback on that examples document, send them my way. I'm happy to update it. I added a new kind of a rotating section looking at vulnerabilities in the CISA KEV. So I'm providing examples that a version 4 example for a vulnerability that appears at the top of the CISA KEV when I do updates. So I've updated the examples doc 3 times this calendar year with a number of examples updates for server-side request forgery, cross-site request forgery, the regression vulnerability, trying to clarify examples around subsequent system updates, adding that CISA KEV example, examples to cross-site scripting, and we're trying to add more threat and environmental examples in the documentation to show how consumers of CVSS can enrich their own CVSS vectors by providing those threat and environmental vectors. And more importantly, through the examples, understand the decision points that need to be made, and then the information that you need to gather from your own environment, where that threat information can come from, where that environmental, the makeup of the systems, the value of the systems in your environment, and how to make those decisions and how to generate those enriched vector strings for your own environment. We've updated the FAQ with a number of new resources. The item I added about the why of the math earlier in 2024 was really around some of these questions about how the math changes in version 4, and added some more information about that. We added some information about how to create your own CVSS calculator, how to use existing libraries to make your own. There's lots of really cool, exciting ports of those libraries that have been made for different languages. That's available on our resources repo. And then most recently, we added FAQ about how vendors should be doing reassessment. So a vulnerability that is in a library or component that they consume, they provide a unique assessment for that, the impact of that vulnerability on their own systems, because there was a blog post by Curl reading CVSS is dead to us. And that really set me off. So I'm like, I identify and I agree with Daniel. There are challenges in how some people implement CVSS, and I'm sorry that CVSS is dead to them. I understand the concern, but really there are lots of vendors who are understanding how vulnerabilities impact their own systems and then are providing unique assessments to their own products. And we're trying to provide some guidance around that. What I'd like to do, and I'm trying to corner people this week from the CVE program and from NVD about how we can represent that in vulnerability databases. How we can say if this OpenSSL vulnerability impacts systems broadly, there's one CVSS assessment, but it may be different on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It may be different on Microsoft Windows. It may be different on Cisco iOS XE. So it's dependent on the platform, and I'd like to see where we can get to a world where we have per platform assessments for CVE that can change that CVSS score to be unique to a platform, so we can get closer to having, even if we can't make threat and environmental metrics for all of our customers, we can at least get a more appropriate base CVSS score for those products that we produce and consume. So that's the latest update that we did to the FAQ. Lots of tooling support has come out in the last year. Again, CVE program and NVD have added support for that. The Red Hat library that underlies the calculator on CVSS, the CVSS site at first.org, has been updated, improved. If you are interested in incorporating CVSS version 4 functionality in your own software, it's free to use, go grab it. There are many more third-party tools to support CVSS version 4. Stephen Schaefer talked about his CVSS BT. He added support for version 4. We linked that on our resources guide. We have other resources on the CVSS resources repo for testing and creating your own tools. So all of this is really about how we can help to support and improve adoption of version 4. And so we started to get some concerns about version 4 adoption, and anecdotally, we don't know, and I haven't gone back and compared at what point in time how many version 3 scores existed to now in version 4. We have concerns, of course, when you put your little baby out in the world and you're hoping it grows up big and strong, but I don't know if it's maturing at the same rate as version 3 did, right? So we started the CVSS survey, and we are really concerned about what are some of the pain points, what are the adoption rates, and really how can we improve what we're doing to help consumers and producers use version 4 in their environments. So I'll talk about some of those results. might give you some confidence if you're not using version 4 and you want to move to it, or maybe you're like, never mind, I'll wait for version 5. Let's talk about some of those results. So we've had over 500 responses since September 2024. If you haven't taken the survey or if you're curious, it's in the Discord. I put a link in there. It's also available on CVSS, the CVSS site, first.org/CVSS. So over 500 responses is the last time I looked at this. So we asked a number of questions, but the main question we asked was, is CVSS version 4 worth it? Do you think the transition from version 3 to version 4, or at least some form of adoption of version 4 in your environment, is worth it? 26% said, nah, I'm good. I'm good with 2.0 or whatever. But 74% of all respondents said, yeah, we think version 4 is worth it. Now, curiously, among those who reported no usage of version 4, half said, no, thank you, not worth it. And half said, yeah, we think it's worth it. So that's if they have no self-reported uses of version 4. However, if you're a consumer on the left or a producer of version 4, as you reported in the tool, overwhelmingly, organizations who've adopted version 4 like it. Especially if you're a producer, 85% of producers who use and produce version 4 say it was worth the effort. A little smaller on the consumer side, but 77% say it was worth it. Now, this is a survey about CVSS version 4, and there may be some bias here. If you move to version 4, you want to be like, yeah, it was great, even though it was terrible. So, kind of take that with a grain of salt. But it seems like people who have moved to version 4 like version 4. But there are some challenges to it, and we understand that. So we asked some questions. And this is, the blue here is if it's a publisher. Orange is a publisher. The middle column is a publisher of version 4. And then the right-hand column, the green, is consumer. So these are all the challenges to version 4. And really, it's not important to look at every specific one, but there's no one that is the reason that is blocking adoption of version 4. There are lots of reasons. It's hard. It takes time. The tools aren't there. The standards aren't there. Other things that rely on it, lack of demand. It's sort of a chicken and egg thing. If nobody asks for it, you're not going to do it, but you're not going to do it if nobody asks for it. It's hard. So there are lots of reasons why CVSS version 4 adoption may seem to be lagging. So we're trying to improve some of these things and helping to produce tooling, to produce guidance, examples, this implementation guide that we're talking about to help organizations move version 4 or just use CVSS in a more mature way in their own environments. But is CVSS version 4 adoption slow? This shows among respondents what version of CVSS they're using. Now, this poll was about CVSS version 4. So maybe it's not surprising, but there are still a lot of respondents who reported use of version 4. Almost half of respondents to the poll said they are using version 4, and that's more than any other version of the standard. There's still a long tail on version 2. Actually, quite a few users of version 2, but also version 3, version 4. So lots of versions of the standard are being used in lots of environments. So I'm just curious, by show of hands, anybody willing to admit they're still using version 2? I don't see any hand. Okay, some people reported it. How about, are you still on version 3? Okay, yeah. And are you version 4? All right, so a bit of a mix. Yeah, and really that's the message here from the survey, is that there's a lot of different versions of CVSS that are being used concurrently. But it's not just CVSS. CVSS does not work in a vacuum. Most respondents are using CVSS in concert with other scoring and evaluation systems in their own environment. Out of our 500 respondents, 37% use 2 or more systems. And this is a little bit hard to see, but you can look at it in detail if you download the slides. But really, the takeaway here is that everybody uses CVSS and other systems in combination. So I know we sort of talked about nobody should stack rank CVSS vectors and just use that, but that's not what most organizations are doing, at least among the respondents of the survey. They're using SSVC, EPSS, the vendor and assessments that are the assessments that are provided by their vendor, those qualitative boundaries, and even their own internal systems. So there's a lot who are using internally developed systems along with these other standards. So there's a big group of organizations who are using multiple data points, and that's great. Yeah, see, these are all very complementary, and they should be used all together. So what we're trying to use is the results of that survey to guide some of our efforts in the SIG moving forward. I talked about this enhanced user guide. It's a guide for those who are implementing vulnerability management systems and they're using CVSS in their environment to level up their use of CVSS, how to take that base score, add threat, environmental, supplemental, and get closer to making risk-based decisions in their environment. But we're trying to provide some concrete guidance around that. And we're also looking at examples and further documentation, and providing more examples about CVSS enrichment. I talked about that per product assessment. I would like to get to where we are seeing CVSS assessments on a per platform basis. And we're starting down that road. And, you know, I joked about version 5. We're not going to see version 4.1 anytime soon. You know, we understand it takes time to transition things. You know, we don't want to rock the boat. You know, we won't see version 4 this calendar year. If version 4 comes out sometime in 2026, it'll be a documentation update. It'll be just like version 3.1. It'll be interchangeable. And it will really just to be about clarifying those documentation pieces to make it clearer, make better decisions about how to produce and consume CVSS. So if you're interested in getting involved, you can become a member of the SIG, first.org/CVSS, ask questions, CVSS at first.org, you know, talking about some of the examples. If you'd like to see examples in the examples document, if you have questions about a score, had vendors, lots of vendors like, we don't know how to evaluate these things. The documentation isn't clear. Send it our way. We're happy to have a conversation about it. We've had guest speakers come and talk to us. We've had some great security researchers come and talk to us about their own challenges. We've had people from other SIGs and FIRST and other organizations come and talk to all of them, but we can please give a forum to talk about it and help to answer any questions. Where to find us, first.org/CVSS to get some of those there. So I'll put this resources document slide up again. A QR code goes to the GitHub where the tool that I talked about earlier was. I put all these links in the Discord. If you have any questions, I'll reserve time here for it. But questions going forward, you want to reach out first. I realize that's wrong. It's CVSS at first.org. Oh boy. How'd that make it through the editing process? Who's writing these slides anyway? Yeah, don't do that. That's not going to go anywhere. All right. Well, I told you I'd get you out of here early. If you want to hang out and chat, I'll be here for a little bit. But I see lots of faces I recognize. I'll be in this room as a room host the rest of the day. If you want to come ask questions, I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for your time. We'll see you around.